and welcome back to Vinyl Friday, where I go through my records and I talk about why I love them. The album that we're going to be covering today has featured several times on the polls that I run to choose the album that we'll listen to for Classic Album Week every month, and it always seems to come in second or third. However, given that the artist of this album is Canadian, and that Tuesday was Canada Day,
oh, Canada, our home and native land.
I'm going to take this as the perfect excuse to cover Jagged Little Pill by Alanis Morissette. It sounds like this.
And all I really want is some patience. Be a good girl. You gotta try a little. One hand in my pocket and the other one is spraying up me. She's like, you live, you learn, you learn. I couldn't help it. It's all your fault. Well, it's full speed, baby. Who would have thought it figures? Visiting hours are 9 to 5, and if I show up at 6:10, well,
Before we get too stuck in, I would like to say something that's a little bit of a bummer, and that's that this episode will feature discussion about the exploitation of minors and also disordered eating. So if that's not something you feel like watching, I fully understand, and I welcome you to watch anything else that you like, on my channel or otherwise. With that said, let's talk about the album. Here is why I had this on my list of classic albums. At 33 million sales, this is one of the best-selling albums of all time. It won 6 Junos. It won a Brit Award. It won 3 MTV Music Video Awards. It swiped 4 Grammys. After the album was released, they toured it for 18 months. They filmed the tour, and the video of that tour also won a Grammy. And if all of that is not enough to convince you, Benny Andersson of ABBA names this album as one of the 6 soundtracks of his life. So, there's a hell of an endorsement for you. And here's a little bit about the artist herself. Alanis Morissette began her career as a teen dance pop star.
oh, too hot, never too cold. You make it a shot too hot to.
She entered the industry at about 14. She released her first album at about 16. She opened for Vanilla Ice. And her second album came out about a year later, but it sold poorly by comparison against the first, so she was dropped by the label. And that was fine because although Alanis co-wrote every song on both albums, she was ready for a bit more creative freedom, especially as it pertained to her image and to her lyrics. So she moves to Los Angeles, where she meets a producer named Glenn Ballard, and the two of them hit it off instantly. Hello. They sit down, they very quickly end up writing an entire album, which would become Jagged Little Pill. They record all the demos in Glenn's studio. They shopped around for a long time for a label, and they were consistently rejected.
Read a minute, man. Mispronounce my name. You didn't wait for all the information before it turned me away.
They arrived at the conclusion that they would maybe have to release it independently until a small label named Maverick gave them a shot. This album was not expected to sell well at all.
Initially, they thought maybe 175,000 copies, and I remember having heard that number and thinking to myself, oh my God, that's a lot.
They basically hoped that they would recoup their costs and make enough so that they could produce a second record. However, the radio station K-Rock picked it up. Listeners found that it was immediately arresting, especially given the very frank, very lewd content and the delightfully colorful language. From there, the other singles from the album took off, and the album itself just blew up. I realized in putting together this episode and making my notes for it that one of my earliest musical memories was actually of listening to Head Over Feet from this album. It was playing on the car radio on my drive to primary school, and my dad turned to me and he said, "How do you know this song?" It was so pervasive that basically the only time that I would have heard this song was in the car or maybe like at the supermarket, and yet I knew the song word for word. My parents aren't Alanis Morissette fans. In fact, I'm fairly confident that they don't even know who she is. So once the song was off the radio, I didn't hear it again until I was about 11 or 12 years old. But I had never forgotten the melody, and I immediately went, that's that song that's been in my head for years. So all of this to say, one, the song was everywhere, and two, the music was so immaculately written and the hooks were so hooky and so memorable that I never forgot them, despite only hearing them for a few months when I was 5 years old. So far then, this is a story of reinventions and letdowns and redemption, and it reads like one of the great success stories. However, as is the case with many stories of women's success, the path to Alanis Morissette's triumph was littered with exploitative acts. Throughout her early career, when she was in her teens, she was groomed by multiple music industry mentors who pursued her for more than professional relationships. She released a song called Hands Clean on a later album about one of these relationships, which took place when she was 14 years old, written from the perspective of her mentor, with lyrics like this.
If you weren't so wise beyond your years, I would have been able to control myself.
And like this.
Just make sure you don't tell on me, especially to members of your family.
She developed disordered eating.
If you watch that weight and you keep it very hard.
And she refers explicitly to this experience within the music industry on one of the songs on this album about shopping around for a label.
You took me out to late 969, but didn't hear a damn word I say.
Recently, she made this statement in response to her experiences of sexism in the music industry. I've spent decades in an industry that is rife with an overarching anti-woman sentiment and have tolerated a lot of condescension and disrespect, reduction, dismissiveness, contract breaching, unsupportiveness, exploitation, and psychological violence, and more throughout my career. Now, as you may know, I typically prefer to not delve into the personal lives of the artists that I'm covering, unless their personal life is relevant to the music that we're discussing. And in this case, I think it is. Today we're going to be breaking down You Oughta Know. And when I hear this song, I don't only hear this anthemic kick-ass takedown of an ex. I also hear it as a reclamation of a young woman's personal and professional power following years of exploitation. So let's have a chat about how the music achieves this. Alanis Morissette has never confirmed one way or the other who this song is about, but she has said on some occasions that it is about a specific person, and on others how it's about the accumulated experiences that she has had with several people. But the suspicion is that it's about actor Dave Coulier, yes, of Full House. He seems to think so, at least, but in Alanis's words, I just think if you're gonna take credit for a song where I'm singing about someone being a douche or an asshole, you might not want to say, hey, that's me! If this is true, she was 18 at the time, and he was 33 years old. Anyway, Alanis chose the song as the lead single, against the advice of many others. Let's listen to it.
I want you to know.
This introduction comes in cold. There is no preamble. It's chilling, it's menacing. We immediately, from jump, hear a person who is in control of this situation. We are not running the show. Alanis is. Her vocal delivery is breathy and it's impassioned. Alanis did almost everything vocally in single takes. She might do 2 takes. They recorded this, I think, in 1 take when they were doing the demos. Once they were picked up and they moved to a studio, like a proper serious studio, to polish up the album and get it ready for commercial release, she refused to record another vocal. She was like, nope, I've done that. You can take the one from the demo, because she said that she didn't want her album to sound like Steely Dan. Bam, this is me. Take it as it is, she said. I'm embellishing, but you get the idea. And there's a very quiet, whispery sort of a drum happening in the background.
I'm happy for you.
I love that her voice sounds like she's making a threat, even though the lyrics present the opposite. I want you to know that I'm happy for you. Isn't it ironic that the most ironic moment on this album isn't actually on the track ironic? From here, we crash into the rest of the verse.
I know the version of me. Is she perverted like me?
It's like a jump scare. We react to the song at her command. The drums are fuller. There's this unsettling tremolo guitar that's been added to the mix. It's played by Dave Navarro, who was in the Red Hot Chili Peppers at the time. We've also got this funk injection coming in from Flea, also of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. The man has exquisite feel. As John Frusciante had recently quit the band and Anthony had relapsed, Dave and Flea were sort of kicking around with not much to do with their own band. They were asked to be on this album and they said yes, and they honestly bring so much to it. We're going to talk more about the bass in a bit, but we're not there yet. First, the tension heightens further. Her vocals are bigger at this point. They're nowhere near at full horsepower, but they are bigger than they were before. And we have our first bombshell line.
Would she go down on you in a theater?
I find this powerful in several ways. The first is that nice girls are not meant to do things like that. And the second is that nice girls are not meant to talk about doing things like that. Having this line this close to the beginning of the song is like making a scene in public. It's immediately attention grabbing, and it's an intentional subversion of what's expected of her as a young woman. Like, society really curbs the kind of fun that young women can have. It's also so specific that it dispels any doubt that the listener might have as to whether or not this experience she's regaling us with is fictitious. We've come to the pre-chorus. So up till this point in the song, we've had a quiet, sparse, breathy vocal, something a little bit more on the nose, a little bit more abrupt, a little bit bigger. And now things are going to get really busy. She sings this, they're not triplets, but it's tripletish. We'll have a listen. See, a triplet would be da 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 da, whereas this is a da 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 da. But it amps up the pacing of this album. Ba 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 ba. I've got this shadow tattoo across my face. Don't worry, it won't last long. Sunlight is, after all, ephemeral. Looping, but ephemeral. It kicks up the pacing of the song, even though the actual tempo hasn't sped up. She's singing faster, so it feels more energetic. And I really love the way she spits out this no. We've added some distorted guitar to this section of the song, to this pre-chorus. And as we come to the end of the pre-chorus, she repeats the line, till you die. So till you die, while you're still alive. And this, again, sounds to me like an explicit threat. This is someone who is unafraid and who will not be downtrodden. She will be exploited no further. She rears back. She strikes. We're at the chorus. So the busyness, the polyrhythmic nature of the pre-chorus gives way to these much more straightforward driving rhythms coming through from the guitar, from the bass, lots of downstrokes. Whereas Flea was playing more of a in the previous section. I promise we will come to the bass. But now's not the time. Despite it being really straightforward, it's still a little bit sloppy, a little bit messy, especially as the hi-hat, I believe, is now open in the song. Drum correspondent, can you tell us a bit more about that, please? And I love that messiness coincides with the line, of the mess you left when you went away. It's just a disaster site. The landscape of her relationship, or what was left of it, it's a mess. The musicians are doing their best to reflect that. Good job, band. Once again, she's ignoring the niceties, she's airing the grievances. And the thing about this chorus and this song generally is that it came out at a point in time where angry man music was pretty commonplace. Nirvana had blown up at the end of 1991, and then there were a whole lot of artists that followed in their stead as music executives rushed to sign other bands that sounded like Nirvana and could make as much money as Nirvana. So people were kind of, I would say, accustomed by 1995 to the sound of someone singing angrily on the radio. But they were mostly men. And while there were these like confessional singer-songwriters who were operating in alternative music at the time, like Tori Amos,
Every day, I crucify myself.
and Liz Phair,
Never said nothing.
and PJ Harvey,
Never mattered on your issue. Never.
they didn't sound like this. Alanis is singular. Alanis's voice and the way that she delivers her messages, it's singular. We come to the end of the chorus and she just hurls her lyrics at the person that she's making these accusations against. Oh, and listen to how Flea is complimenting what she's saying. He is doubling the sung part. That was gorgeous. I know. I don't know how you stand it.
I don't know. You.
I love the end of that chorus there. You can hear the little bit of distortion on her voice, and just before we jump into the next verse, Flea has this tasteful, but not obnoxiously showy little fill. Again, he was just such a fantastic bassist because he was so monstrously talented, and he could take up more space if he wanted to, but he also had, I think, especially by this point in his career, a sense of how to be the rhythm section, an understanding of his job as a support role for some of the lead instruments. This is a good example of that. He's not getting too big for his boots, but he is getting to show off a little bit what he can do. It is in verse 2 that we encounter our second very ear-catching lyric. Alanis drops an F-bomb. So if you don't like swears, cover your ears. It's coming.
And I am thinking of me when you fuck her.
Alanis. I have to say, I really love that K-Rock played this uncensored. Like, you know that they would have had a slew of people writing in and being like, how dare you swear on the radio? In true rock and roll fashion, they were like, there's an interlude following our second chorus, and it serves the same purpose as the beginning of the song. I think it brings everything back to this quietly threatening, eerie place. And it makes room for things to get bigger again as we near the end of the song. A little solo for Alanis's voice. She has some incredible musicians at her disposal, but she's like, no, I'm gonna do the solo. I got this, fellas. Doubles over itself so it echoes to this din right before we drop back into our last pre-chorus. Okay, this is the moment in the episode where we are going to talk about what Flea is doing, because everything that he does up until this point is a variation on this, but this is where he brings his A game. Before, he's been restrained. In the first verse, he's keeping it to like a do-do, ba-do-do, ba-do-do-do-do, really simple, tasteful, but understated fills. They get a little bit bigger in the second pre-chorus, but this one, he unfurls. And here's what he's doing. Bass Correspondent. Love it. We come to our last chorus. Our final chorus adds this squealing guitar. High-pitched. Let's have it. Yikes. Hell of an ending there. A bilious cacophony, and then everything drops away and we just get that distorted, distressed, heavy vocal. As listeners, we are left with this echoing silence. I know it's an oxymoron, but it's a tasteful one. We feel drained. We feel thoroughly chastised. 10 out of 10, I would do it again. And also remember that she was like 19 or 20 years old when she was writing these songs. Whew! Good work. Good work, Les. So I guess the last question to ask here is, did this album, did this song, did Alanis Morissette solve sexism? Stupid question. Well, no. Even during the release of this album, so many of the reviews were just incredibly condescending. Like, I have some samples for you. David Wilde of Rolling Stone in 1995 called Alanis the queen of this year's pop culture prom, and said that her live performance is, quote, less like a concert than modern rock group therapy. Stephen Thomas Erlewine of AllMusic adds, her bitter diary entries are given a pop gloss that gives them entry to the pop charts. It's obnoxious to say these things. Oh, no, there's one more. This is the worst one. Greg Cott of the Chicago Tribune says, she strives for catharsis, but often merely sounds histrionic. Now that is a Victorian level insult to this woman's intelligence and autonomy, because all pop music, all rock music serves as a point of catharsis for their writers. At some point, you know, like music itself exists to express emotion. And you could equally make the argument that Robert Plant sounds histrionic. Death metal artists, I don't know of any in particular, it's not my wheelhouse, sound histrionic. But no, it's women who get described as histrionic, for the most part. I think a year before this, Eric Clapton released this incredibly emotive song about the death of his son. But that's not too confessional, that's not diary entry, that's not, what was it that they said in Rolling Stone? Group therapy. That's just good music. But it did seem to liberate her in a sense. Like, she went from sounding and looking like this to this. And she went on to take the reins fully for future projects with the production and the writing and all of it, what have you. It established a precedent for her also, these unflinchingly honest lyrics. And it kicked down the doors for other artists who were following in her wake. Not only did it prove that this is creatively valid, despite what the Chicago Tribune chooses to print, it also demonstrated that it was worth it to record companies to invest in this kind of music. Not that I want to end on capitalism. Music and musicians are worth more than the revenue that they can bring in for their label. But with all of that said, I just want to say thank you, Alanis Morissette. We really appreciate you. Speaking of appreciation, that's it from me, and if you enjoyed this episode or would like to support any of the weird things that I do, I will leave a link in the description to my Buy Me a Coffee page, where you are most welcome to make a donation if you wish, but no pressure, my friends. Thank you so much to everybody who has signed up as a member or made a donation. I appreciate you so very much. If you're curious about what any of my original music sounds like, I will leave a link in the description to that as well. To the person who last week told me to go back to covering the White Album, next week I'll be covering the White Album. There is a schedule to these things, folks. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you here next week. Have a great weekend! Covered in cat hair. You did that. You did that. She in the car. Do you mind?